Number 7, when a girl sighs. If a girl sighs, I'll try to switch the topic. Your sighing is like, just a deep breath. Now, again, good news, everybody. You don't have to remember every single of these signs, like checking nails, rolling eyes, sighing. You don't have to do this if you stick to the rule that you don't talk long. Especially with somebody you barely know. Just talk 10, 15 seconds, 30 seconds at most, and they won't get bored. They won't have a chance to get bored, because then it's their turn. You ask them a question, they respond, they can change the conversation topic. So with neurotypicals, conversation is primarily about building togetherness. So one person should never go on a rant or talk too long without inviting the other person for feedback. But again, sighing. So if you do find yourself talking too long and the girl sighs, if it's accompanied by the other bad signs, like she's scanning the room, she's not looking much at you, she's not asking any questions, whatever. That means that's not going well. She's not interested in the conversation. But sighing alone doesn't have to be a bad sign. Like I might sigh maybe if if I'm really, really hungry and the food takes half an hour to get here, or I'm really, really thirsty, and maybe we're sitting outdoors at a cafe and we just rode bikes or whatever, and I'm really, really thirsty, and the waitress takes forever even to bring out water or whatever. So somebody might be sighing out of other reasons, you have to look for, first of all, if you're talking too long, then that happens, and then look for that she's after the sigh, is she looking right back at you and interested in a conversation and seeing about what you're talking about. Then the sigh was probably nothing. But if she's like sighing, scanning the room, and that's something where you have to stop yourself again immediately. Do not switch the topic like he writes here. Just ask. Just stop yourself, ask something, and if you were like right in the middle of a long rant where it's kind of awkward to stop suddenly, then you can just stop and say, but I'm talking a bit too long. So what do you think about Doctor Who? Are you watching the show? I've had to memorize specific topics to bring up with different friends. If someone likes a sport like hockey, I can ask them if they've seen the most recent game. If someone likes movies, I can ask them if they've seen any movies recently. It takes time for me to figure out what are the optimal conversation topics for different people. Again, this is under number 7, and that doesn't really have to do with sighing. And I think he's trying too hard to get good at conversation with people around him by figuring out what they're about and then starting conversations about things they are interested in. I would say, yes, of your very closest friends, or your romantic partner, you have to know them well, and then you ask them, about, I don't know, if they got a cancer diagnosis, you have to, of course, the moment you see them, ask about how they're doing, or if they have an exam coming up. Of course, the next time you see them, you ask about their exam, or if they really love bike riding, you might, and they bought a new bike, the next time you ask them, so how do you like your new bike? But usually with like coworkers and stuff, don't keep track of what everybody's into and then ask them about that because it typically shows if you're not really interested in what they're into, then asking it can almost come across as creepy, as like, like a car salesman, this person's trying to build rapport even though they're not really interested in me. And it can be creepy if somebody, like he writes, it takes time for me to figure out what are the optimal conversation topics. That's just not necessary. You don't, again, this person clearly tries hard to start conversations all the time, and that's not not on you. I mean, you can start a conversation every now and then, and it can be about things you're interested in, especially with people you have barely contact with. You know, if they ask you how was your weekend, you can say, oh, you know, I went to this Magic the Gathering convention, and you know, as long as you then don't start a rant, but just, you know, say that, and then they can ask more about it, fine. You know, you don't have to ask them how, if they watch the hockey game, if you're not interested in hockey. That's, you know, that falls flat. Okay, number 8, when she uses her arm to hold up her chin. And yeah, this is like the high schooler bored in class gesture, and I don't think a lot of adults, you know, past the age of 30 would do this, because it's really like, you know, it is really rude. So it's a bad sign, again, combined with everything else. A person should never have time in a conversation to do this, because you like you can see right now, I can't talk like this, especially if I'm actually resting my head on my. So yeah, if somebody does that, yeah, you're talking too long. You know, in a conversation, again, talk in those little bits of 10, 15 seconds, 30 at most if it's a bit more complex point. And then nobody ever has a chance to you know, sigh and fall asleep and rest their hand on their hand, head on their hand. You know, the conversation is not a TED talk. It's building togetherness. So this constant back and forth is very important. Okay, number 9, when she starts reaching for her keys. People generally reach for their keys when they want to go home, and yeah, that's very observant and accurate. You know, if I'm really into this date with this guy, I hate the thought of leaving. You know, I would never like get my purse and go for my keys or whatever. I don't want the date to end. So yeah. That's a bad sign. Now, I could imagine that, for example, I mean, our women's purses are like, they have millions of things in them. So she might be like reaching for her chapstick, for her phone to just briefly check if maybe she has whatever kids at home or something important that might come up. Maybe she put her phone on silent, but there might be a message that come in that she has to respond to if she's like on call or whatever. So she might be reaching into her purse and keys might be jangling as she's reaching for something else, and that's then not a bad sign. So again, but if you hear like constant jangling of keys and she's not really pulling anything out of her purse, yeah, that's a bad sign. She wants to wrap up the date. And you know, even kind of rude, you know, typical people who might do this or roll their eyes, which is all like, it's like too rude for adults, you know, to ever do in a conversation. You know, but even adults that are rude enough to do that, they're usually not so rude that they would say and have the courage to say, you know what, I just don't enjoy this date at all. You know, excuse me, I'm just gonna go. You know, especially as very often it's the guy who invited the girl, so yeah, you feel like you owe him your time or whatever. And often there's like, you know, you have hope that it gets better. So if there are extreme signs that the girl doesn't like being on a date with you, one of the kindest things you can then do is, like, if the signs are super, super strong, you know, you could say, if it's a first date, you know, I can tell this date's not going well, and I really don't want to, you know, take up your time if you're not totally enjoying this. So if you want to, you know, we can wrap it up here. I would not, you know, mind it at all. And then see, you know, the girl might say, yeah, you know, that's true, and then, you know, let's wrap it up here, and then you cut down the awkwardness of another half hour down to, you know, extreme awkwardness of 1, 2, 3 minutes as you get the check, and then, you know, just go your separate ways. But again, that's up to the guy typically, you know, especially if he invited the girl, if he made the suggestion. And again, if there are extreme signs of boredom, it just didn't go well, and I would never expect that to happen if you're good at conversation, if you gave her the chance to talk a lot. Because if you show interest in what she has to say, then people enjoy talking with you. Even it doesn't matter what you look like, if she's not into your hobbies. But if she has a chance to talk about herself and you show really sincere interest, then nobody would cut a conversation short. So, yeah, it's still kind of an occurrence or an event where you kind of have to learn from and then really think, okay, was I attentive enough? Maybe I did go on a rant and talked for minutes, something like that. Okay, number 10 and final point, when she says she has an early morning at work. An early morning at work is usually the girl trying to be polite instead of saying, I want to get the hell out of here now. It's easier for me to understand blunt people compared to people who sugarcoat anything. I get confused. Again, neurotypical people usually feel very, very uncomfortable to be blunt. And, it's so ingrained that conversation and meeting a person is about building togetherness. You never want to tear it down unless this person is like, if he's a racist, if he's, if he's just eating meat 3 times a day and you're a vegetarian or whatever, then it might be so against your own values that you get blunt and rude and get out of there. But just neurotypicals do sugarcoat things, and there's nothing to say that this is a worse way than being direct. Now, when she says she has an early morning at work, if she says that in the middle or like right as you're finishing up dinner and you really only had like an hour or hour and a half together, that's a bad sign. And if it's like only like 8:30 and she said, oh, I have an early morning at work, that's not a good sign. However, I would not say this is an automatic bad sign. I guess you have to look for other things. Did she smile at you a lot? Did you have a good conversation that went back and forth? Because I might actually say I have an early morning at work. Let's say I go out for dinner and it's a really good first date, and you have this great conversation. You smile at each other. It's going well, and I'm really interested in what the guy has to say. The guy reacts well to what I have to say, and so we're talking like 2 hours or 2.5 hours. I might say I have an early morning at work because I think guys often then at that point they feel that, oh, should we continue this? Maybe it's not good to say goodbye right now. They think of all the romantic movies and all the other dates that they might have that went well, where afterwards they maybe took a long walk, and then maybe they went somewhere else to get drinks. And, sometimes they even go like, well, if it's going this well, nowadays a lot of people just go on straight to physical intimacy, which I don't do or even understand, but it happens. So a guy at that point, if the date is going really well, might think about just continuing. And I might then say, as we wrap up dinner and took our time, and maybe even like the check already came, and I get up, at that point I might say, I have an early morning at work. Just simply so the guy knows not to ask, do you want to go somewhere else and get drinks? Do you want to go somewhere else and get a coffee? Or do you want to go home and meet my dog? Or stuff like that. Because then at that point, I would probably decline. And then it creates an awkward, negative situation at the end of a really, really good date. So I might say I have an early morning at work, but I'll smile and say something right afterwards like, oh man, I enjoyed this date so much, let's do this again soon. So a girl might say, she has an early morning at work just simply to wrap up the date. That doesn't mean she wouldn't enjoy spending more time with you, but simply, some people like to have that first dinner, get to know the other person a bit, and then, just leave more to the second and following dates. Anyway, so yeah, if you're only interested in body language and signs that the girl is bored, that you can stop watching here. Basically, big summary. Yes, he lists a lot of clear signs that the person is bored. It's good to know those signs and watch out for them. But the most important thing is simply that a conversation should never be where you tell her lots of interesting things, but that it's a back and forth. And I've had that with, and the guys with Asperger's I dated, they were not, socially inept. They were very socially well versed over the years, but even there it can happen that your old friend that you've known for years and maybe you haven't seen him in a few months, you meet him and you sit down for coffee and a chat, and he'll tell you for 15 minutes about whatever the caterpillars that he's raising in his yard or whatever, and that's so regrettable, because again, conversation is about building togetherness, personal things, catching up. And catching up doesn't mean that he tells me all the details about what he's doing in his hobby. That's like, it's you want that back and forth. Ideally, even like maybe even joking a bit around and feeling the togetherness. And it's not about this TED talk about all that I've been up to, and here's all the interesting stuff that I've done. So if you make sure you talk very, just tiny chunks at a time, ask questions, give the girl or the woman a chance to talk, and then if you listen with attention when she has things to say, then there will never be these kind of gestures. She won't have to sit through a rant, and things will go well. And with this I go back to the number 4, where he gets into this rant about I enjoy sports, movies, television and books. So I'll try to work those topics in when possible. I've had speed dates where it felt like time stopped for 8 painfully awkward minutes. Again, with a stranger, if you're a good conversationalist, it should never happen. Doesn't matter what the stranger's like, 8 minutes, you can always find something interesting, some togetherness, back and forth. You should be able to have conversation with a stranger for 8 minutes, even if you're not, attracted to them in that way. I knew the speed date was going to be a disaster in the first minute. Okay, when is a speed date a disaster? Maybe if the person insults you right away and tells you that your tattoo sucks, or your hair color is all wrong, or whatever, and is super rude. I knew the speed date was going to be a disaster in the first minute when I found out that the girl loves the outdoors and doesn't have a television. I read that and I cringed a bit, because that's like a thing, sadly, about people with Asperger's, that if they hear about a topic that they're not into, you can read it by their body language. They won't respond much. They won't react to it. They know that they're not good talking about it. And to them, often conversation is like an exchange of information and facts. So if the other person starts on a topic that they don't know anything about, that they can't identify with, it's immediately like eyes glaze over and I don't like this topic. And just body language, often with this flat effect, then just makes it very uncomfortable to talk with a person with Asperger's, because as soon as you start talking about your topics, what you are passionate about, there's like the blinds go down and the person is like clearly doesn't want to talk about it. And again, he writes here, the speed date was going to be a disaster when I found out that the girl loves the outdoors and doesn't have a television. Okay, so she's not into what you're into. Does that automatically mean in the first minute that it's a disaster? No. I mean, you could have completely opposite interests, and not every speed date can lead to great love and a relationship. Speed dating, I imagine, I've never been on a speed date event, but it's just simply can be a way of just having conversations with strangers, and apparently he decided there that he had just nothing to talk about with a girl who loves the outdoors. The activities that I enjoy the most are all indoors. That is hip hop, hockey, kung fu, movies, television, and reading. I hate both camping and hiking. Okay, he uses very strong language here. I think it's miserable to sleep in a cold, uncomfortable tent. When my ex-girlfriend dragged me hiking, I thought, oh look, that's a tree. Great, there's another 1,000 trees. A pond of water is exciting now, because that's the first thing we've seen in the past hour that isn't a tree. And again, this is, some guys with Asperger's actually do this. You start talking about how you went camping, and they might say, oh, I hate camping. It's cold, it's uncomfortable, I can't take a hot shower. All you see is trees. Whoa, what's good about it? And that is so cringy. And again, conversations about building togetherness, it's not about changing information, exchanging information or facts or whatever. And this is the worst thing you can do ever. And think about it, your interests will never 100% match another person. Even if you find the perfect girl for you, she'll have some interests that you are not into at all. So you should try and stop yourself when you go like, if she says, even if it's like something you just completely detest, like maybe astrology, or or even if she likes, if she's religious and she talks about things she does in church or whatever, a adult person who's good at conversation will look for things where it's a positive exchange and it doesn't dismiss people quickly. How do you like it if some girl would find out that you're into Magic the Gathering or Doctor Who, and she goes like, oh, that's a nerd, oh, this is going to be a disaster, now I have to hear about that stuff, or astronomy, just all this science stuff, I just hate it, it's going to be disaster. No, any topic you can have interest and you can learn about it, even if it's just in the way of how do you feel about this, how does it make you feel? Does astrology help you maybe understand people better when it, and then you can hear about the other person's perspective, why they are into astrology, why they are into mountain climbing, even though you're afraid of heights and you could never imagine doing something dangerous like that, or why they like Doctor Who, or what is really so great about Magic the Gathering or whatever. So it's so important just never to dismiss any subject, except if it's like, whatever, if somebody's going on a racist rant or whatever, that is where you can stop and say, okay, I don't really want to find out why this person is racist or whatever, or thinks less of some other, of people of different color. But apart from that, just don't do this, because you don't want that done to you. And it's not even true, just because two people have different interests doesn't mean the conversation has to be bad or something. So that was really, I read this and I thought, if he feels he has to, try so much harder, learn about other people's topics or start conversation or whatever. No, that is not his main problem. His main problem is probably that he does this where, and I might be reading too much into it, he might have simply worded it badly, that he says, oh, this date's gonna be disaster because the girl loves the outdoors, doesn't have a television. Disaster is a bit strong. Maybe he didn't really mean it that way, but I thought, in a meta way, this article was very interesting because it has some concrete good advice, but then it also, between the lines you read and you see that the guy does some stuff that people with Asperger's do that is really, really bad. Like he even says at one point, if a girl gets bored, I start talking faster so I get to the point more quickly. That you absolutely don't do this. You don't talk faster so your conversation partner doesn't get bored. Your conversation partner will get bored because you start talking faster and you're not making pauses, and that the other person contribute to the conversation. Stuff like that, and that he thinks that it's all about topics and picking the right topics, when really having a good conversation is not about the topic at all. It's about that exchange, and two people can just, one person can know everything about the topic and the other person nothing, or they might even have a disagreement, as long as they have this nice exchange where they try to find out how the other person feels about it, and okay, why did you get into this hobby or whatever. I would never think of doing yoga, but so you go to yoga class twice a week, so let me, tell me a bit about what yoga does for you, or CrossFit. Let's say you hate CrossFit. You can ask that meathead who does CrossFit all the time, how do you get up at 5 o'clock in the morning? How do you motivate yourself to work that hard, to get good at CrossFit? So there should always be something where you can find, you can talk with the other person. And of course, that is at the root of Asperger's, where neurotypical people have this intuition where we can almost transport ourselves into the other person and see the world from their view. And that is the thing that we love most about conversation. We find out how the other person views the world, and we have this emotional imagination where just from a few things that they tell us, we can put us into their shoes. And of course, a person with Asperger's has that to a much lesser degree, or is just not able at all to imagine themselves in the other person's shoes. A guy who just likes kung fu and sci-fi movies has a really hard time putting himself into the shoes of a girl who's a vegetarian and does yoga. But I can do that. I can talk with like a Marine. I know nothing about just whatever, or I've never been in the military, but I can talk with a guy who's an ex-Marine or a Marine, and I can learn about what it feels like to serve in the military. And so it's definitely a problem, because to a person with Asperger's, having conversation, they might not have that emotional imagination where it gets really interesting to them, where they can easily put themselves into the other person's shoes. But you can at least try, and you learn things at the very least. So anytime you meet another person and you have that chance to learn about their hobbies, interests, way of seeing the world, I think that's a valuable thing. And with this, I think this rant has gone on way too long, and again, great article, check it out, and I look forward to talking with you again really soon.